IVM.
Hello and welcome to the Wire Talks. I'm Siddharth Bhatia. A new set of rules imposed by the central government recently will make it almost impossible for retired civil servants to write and publish anything that is critical of government policies. According to these rules, any writing by retired bureaucrats and intelligence officers must be cleared by their former departments before it can be published. If they don't, they risk losing their pensions. Regular writers for publications and websites are stunned by these new regulations. Already many of them have gone silent. Our guest today is Jawahar Sarkar, who's become a very familiar name with his prolific writing on issues of governance and other issues, and he will discuss the implications of this new set of rules. Jawahar Sarkar retired recently after 40 years in the civil service, and his last job was as CEO of Prasar Bharati, one of the largest public broadcasters in the world. He was also, among his other posts, a secretary in the Ministry of Culture, where he took up the modernization of museums, archives, and libraries. He is now the chairman of the board of governor of the prestigious Kolkata-based Center for Studies in Social Sciences. Welcome, Jawahar Sarkar, to the Wire Talks.
Thank you, Siddharth.
Please tell us what exactly the existing service rules are for retired bureaucrats.
Well, by and large, most of the central bureaucracy and the parallel state bureaucracies are governed by what is known as the CCSP rules, Central Services Pension Rules. These have been amended from time to time. The basic one we refer to are the 1972 rules that ensure pension, but have a small provision there called Rule 8. Rule 8 has always existed through all regimes, which says that, which empowers the appointing authority, not everyone, only the appointing authority, to take a view on pension. Why I'm using the word take a view on pension is because there are lots of ifs and buts. I mean, it can stop your pension temporarily. It can make a cut in your pension for a few months. It can withhold component of your pension. And what are the grounds? Well, the existing grounds are 1 and 2. One is that you are continuing with good conduct. That is a minefield. What constitutes good conduct? I mean, it's almost kindergarten. That your conduct is good. And it's been deliberately kept vague because bureaucracy loves a bit of vagueness. You can stretch in everything into it. So we'll come to this good conduct bit a little later. And the second clause is that if you have been convicted of a serious offense. On the second clause, I would say that they have a right that if a retired officer goes around murdering his wife or whatever, and then become a nuisance to society, well, they can take a view by cutting his pension or punishing him in some manner. Our focus is on Rule 8, Sub-Rule 1, maintenance of good conduct. Now, on the 31st of May, a bombshell order came out. And as you said, the general interpretation is what you have just said, that no senior retired bureaucrat can ever write anything. But that's not true. That's not true. I'll tell you why it's not true as we come along.
So what are these new regulations? That's what I was coming to. They say you cannot write anything that was in your domain during your entire administrative career. That's pretty broad, isn't it?
Okay, I'll tell you, we have to navigate through bureaucraties. It's a language that's prevalent in most parts of the world, and people who are used to yes, minister, have gone through certain coaching classes in them. Now, the 31st May order is basically on 26 organizations, 26 specific organizations that have their own cadres, their own sets of recruitment, or have deputationists coming into them. A deputationist is somebody who belongs to a different cadre like the Indian Police Service and spends his deputation or spends his period, his working years with any of these organizations. So they are limited to 26 organizations, and all the organizations have some connection with defense or internal security. Defense or internal security, all of them. I mean, the Intelligence Bureau, the CBI, whatever. Now, I don't know how much of internal security CBI looks after. Internal, target getting is what they normally do. But any case, the Enforcement Directorate, etc., etc. We could brand them as sensitive organizations. The amendment says that any person who has worked in these sensitive organizations would require permission of his appointing authority there before he publish something. On face value, this seems to be a clause that is really not draconic. In other words, this kiss and tell business that's gripping the world, somebody who's worked in the Intelligence Bureau or somebody who's worked in counterinsurgency, somebody who's worked in the borders, would know issues, would know of, let us say, little adventures that India had to take into foreign territory. And we maintain what we call an equilibrium in foreign relations. Now, if somebody goes on and highlights that we have made incursions into X country, our neighbor, 21 times in 2 years, it gives a wrong message. It tends to sensationalize. Because what it doesn't mention is that the parallel country has also made 19 incursions into our territory. What happens? These sort of things happen at the border. They are not tantamount to war. This is just an example. So security concerns are perhaps condonable to some extent. Now, so let me exclude the vast majority of pensioners, that will be around 50 lakhs or so. Human longevity is increasing the numbers. In fact, somebody said pensioners are more than serving government servants. It's 55 and 45 now, or whatever. So it excludes straight away 90%, 95% of all pensioners. In other words, an IAS officer who has not had the good fortune of working in Ladakh or has no business to work there is not prohibited from making his statements, is not prohibited from his so-called kiss and tell stories. 95% are excluded. But mind you, the 5 or 10% of the entire mammoth bureaucracy or the retired officer's family are also a critical part. The question now arises is how much of their freedom of expression, their right to inform their nation will be choked in this manner. That is a bigger question. So I've reduced the area of concern to something handy. Okay.
No, that clarifies a lot of things. But however, let us say you said 5%. That's still, say, out of 50 lakhs, 2.5 lakhs people, substantial. Not all of them are writers. But for example, somebody who used to be in RANW writes occasionally for us and for other publications. But one has to also presume that these people are extremely responsible people. I have not seen any writing which is seriously indiscreet. Many of them have written books. I presume the books have to be cleared, but even if they have not revealed anything sensational. So I think to impose these rules is a bit much, wouldn't you say?
Now we are coming to a different point. We were talking of quantities in the last one. Now let us come to the quality and to the morality of the whole issue. Assuming that only 5% are within the ambit of this, and within that 5% only 1% can write. 1% of the universe can write, the remaining others are quite satisfied in playing bridge or doing something more useful. That 1% among them that is really bothered. I'm mentioning Mr. Dulat, for instance. He is a socially motivated person. He's known to be one. Mr. Ribeiro, at 92, is still waving red cards and yellow cards. So we have a lot of splendid officers who have served in the police forces, the intelligence, the army, the quasi-army armed forces, like the Indo-Tibetan Border Police, like the BSF and others, who are now subjected to a prior permission thing. Now, in a regime like the one we are going through, one can safely conclude that no prior permission will be given. Its character is so evident, its paranoia is so clear, its sense of cutting the tree, if only a branch could have served the purpose, is so its capacity to overreact has been established with empirical proof over the last 7 years. So one can assume that this permission clause would be used by the regime against the writers. Now, there is this wide open domain called courts. The courts that we have seen in the last few years are not the courts with which I have worked for 40, 41, 42 years. We were terrified of courts. We were, as an executive, from the block and panchayat and sub-divisional district level, all the way up to the national secretariat and even working with the Prime Minister's office, I would say that we were always on tenterhooks about what the courts might come up with. And even though we felt a little cut up about many an order, we were pretty much conscious that this thing may go against us. The courts that I'm seeing in the last few years, which includes the Supreme Court, has elements like a judge who was open in his praise of the great leader and has been suitably rewarded. And there's a section that is in thrall of the government. There's a section that seems to go one step ahead to see if we can help the government remove this nuisance of protesters from Shaheen Bagh, clear the roads, if we can get these agitating farmers to shut up, things like that. They go an extra hand. I have never seen such interventionism in my life. And I personally consider them most unwarranted. Now, having said that, the courts remain. These 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 of the judges are only a section of the judges. The superb judgment handed out by Justice Chandrachud's bench on the vaccine issue is a reminder that the judiciary is still live and kicking. And kicking, that's more important. One can always approach the judiciary if the order given upon me or prohibiting, say, Julio Ribeiro from writing on something appears palpably unfair. That system is still there. Okay?
As you said, that the chances of it being cleared are next to negligible, almost nothing. So therefore, this might discourage people from writing. Already I told you that this gentleman who writes for us has said that he refuses to, Mr. Dulat has also said that they refuse to send their pieces for censoring, as it were. And so it has already achieved its objective, wouldn't you say?
The objective was to shock and awe, rule with dread, malice as an integral part of state policy, terror as the one of the greatest weapons. Now, we are all used to this discourse, and those who have still stood up to it, knowing fully well what the machinery we work for is capable of doing, bracket, and not capable of doing, bracket close, we have contended with it. It will depend on the B factor. The B factor, I mean the boldness factor officer, his motivation. So we were educated by the columns of people like Raghavan, the former director of Intelligence Bureau, even some of the past writings of even, let us say, Duval. So people have gone on writing on security and intelligence issues, and they have enlightened us. They have sent alarm bells. They have raised concerns. And I frankly believe that they should continue to do so. Now, will this rule stop them? Let us get in for a finer dissection of what the order means. The order appears like a bit like a broad-banded hammer, but would not pass through courts. What the courts are likely to say is that if the revelation of a particular episode is harmful to the interest of India, or something like this, it could be considered for stopping. But if somebody wants to bring out the corruption in the Border Roads Organization, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm picking up on a particular stray example. I get paranoid when I see roads and construction coming out because I know for certain that a substantial part of the brick and mortar is reduced to money. Okay, now somebody comes up with what he thinks is corruption on the Border Roads Organization. Somebody feels that money given for counterinsurgency to X force or Y force is lining up golf courses. So he is still entitled to speak up because the revelation of a golf course would not be inimical to the security of India. Of course, he could always say that the golf course was made there as a helipad. But then we can get into this. I mean, I'm giving you very practical examples. B, when a person like Mr. Ribeiro speaks, he speaks with an authority and a macro view, a helicopter view of what's going on. He normally does not like to mess down and talk to A and B because that sort of distracts. So can overviews of the problem be brought under the mischief of this rule? I doubt it. So what I'm doing is giving you an optimist picture and trying to play down the nuisance of this particular rule. And I have already delineated. Number one, it is only 26 organizations. Number two, they are all security related or security related in some form or the other. See that 95%, of course, that's a very arbitrary number I've given. 95% of India's pensioners would not be affected. This is only to assuage them because many choose to get frightened because they are sort of brought up to be frightened. You know, I've worked with my fellow officers, and after a couple of years of house training, I find timidity to be instilled as a genetic style of functioning. So there are people like that. In fact, we are supposed to be timid, are we? So why blame them? So people get scared too easily. So all that statement of 95% being out of it is only to emphasize that it affects a smaller section. The section that it affects is also not affected across the board. I still insist that if an intelligence bureau officer would like to write about something of even some counter-insurgency operation or something which enhances, let us say, the prestige of India or reveals its capacity to deal with the security situation, he should not be stopped. At the same time, if one comes up with what Kennedy went through, the Bay of Pigs fiasco, and comes up with gory details, there is no point in stopping it. We are an interconnected world. The moment you get into such activities, others are also watching. So why do we stop a poor intelligence officer, police officer, or even a border functionary from revealing something it would be up in the week or two through satellite pictures. It's no more the same thing. It's no more the same thing. Other nations, other news agencies would come up. And what do you do to them? What do you do to them? You behave like Twitter. So you've got to take a view that this is an interconnected world, and the truth, or whatever is passing off as the truth, is bound to be coming out in the public domain. Aaj nahi to kal, either today or tomorrow. So these are views one needs to take. But then let me point on one thing, and then you can please ask me more if you want. This is not in its ambit that we are talking about. It is in its spirit. We are not talking about the size of the lathi and whom it hits. We are talking of the mentality of lifting lathis upon their own tribe. There is a degree of fear that has come into the regime. We talked of fear on this side. The regime that thrives on fear is itself quite frightened, quite alarmed at the degree of dissent, at the degree of openness. It's a closed regime that doesn't believe in all that. Even if you go past the Rajpath, what do they call it? I don't know. Central Vista Beautification Project, vagare, vagare, you will find large tin sheets being put all over and work being carried out in secrecy. Why on earth are you being so secretive? It's a national property of India. So secrecy, coming out with a bang, the revelation factor, 8 p.m. effect, these are part of the psyche that drives the one or two people who again in their turn drive India. So having said that, it is the question of the message it is trying to give. Remember, government is a process. Government is not a final product. And government insists on pushing the envelope all the time. The binary between individual liberties and human rights and the overbearingness of any government, including the ones that I have served, is a perennial story. The lines are pushed, the barricades move forward and backward. And this one, which starts with 26 organizations and let us say 5% of the pensioners or even less, if it succeeds, would try to push its luck with others as well. Now, not on the security clause, they would say good conduct is being impacted. It's so, let us say, so terrible to say such retired officers speak in such harsh language. They need to go through good conduct and moral science classes now. That part is always there. That danger is always there. And there are signs that the witches are boiling their cauldron over an area that extends beyond the 26 organizations.
Yeah. So you've covered a lot of points in this, Jawahar. Actually, one or two points I was coming to. You said what we call, let's say, chilling effect. And then sooner or later, this is a testing, kind of operation. And we'll see if it becomes very effective and it dampens the enthusiasm of those 26 organizations and its ex-staffers. Then why not others? But two things, and I think they're interlinked. You said something about fear in this establishment, in this regime, and you mentioned Twitter. So I was coming to that, in fact, that this Twitter thing has to be, and these rules have to be seen in the context of several other efforts to clamp down on criticism and any kind of dissent. You have young women who are activists being picked up, journalists being locked up, cartoonists being pressured, comedians being thrown into jail. It's really speaking an attempt to shut your ears to anything that could be criticism or be hurtful. to your sensitivities. I mean, 3 years of those wonderful activists working on the ground for some Bhima Koregaon, conspiracy. All of them have done splendid work in the field. Professor Teltumde has been a writer of these on these issues. What is the real fear? Can you explain what this fear is? There is there are no elections for 3 years. Nobody is going to vote them out. What is this fear? Where is it coming from?
I would put it like this. Other regimes have also evinced such qualities or traits. I joined the government service in 1975, July, for absolutely no fault of mine. I just appeared at an exam. And it was a crossover from the agitational mode to the compliant mode. And very difficult during the emergency. But never mind. It's a choice that one took. Now, all regimes have these tendencies, but this one is an MA PhD did it in this manner. The thoughts that cross their mind, I can only guess. Number one is that dissent is a manufactured one. They sincerely believe that in this good, pleasant country with a great leader and his Achhe Din, there is no scope for dissent. He is God's gift to humanity. There is no scope of dissent, and whoever is coming out with dissent is a chamcha or a spoon of the Gandhi family. Now, where is the Gandhi family? I don't know. I mean, are they still in Delhi or wherever? I'm not sure. But their presence doesn't seem to be very overwhelming. So why are you dragging in the Gandhi family with people who may have problems even with Gandhi family? So they refuse to acknowledge that there can be any view other than a sheer exercise in bhaktism. Bhakt. So they really feel that these are engineered ones. You and I are engineered ones, or you and I are frustrated ones. And that they represent a particular class, the Lutyens Delhi class, the Khan Market gang, or whatever. They keep giving these names, basically announcing, shrieking their deprivation. It is shrieking out their deprivation, their inferiority complex, especially of the person who may have spent a lot of time in Delhi as a pracharak and couldn't get a hang of what's going on, or may have been overwhelmed by Delhi, whatever. So we move on. So it is a sign that it's an engineered act by heinous elements, and therefore it's our patriotic duty to crush it. That's the first thing. Second is, a narrative is set. They are producers of narratives of a type that would make Hollywood blanch. A Hollywood gives a storyline, it then gets accoutrements to go with it, it evolves the storyline. It has its own style of doing it. But here, the narrative production factory has actually gone through this, more so in the last 7 years, but even before. They produce their own narrative. Now, anything that is contrary to the narrative is like those academics, those scholars who screamed and fell on the feet of the invader in Alexandria Library, in the Library of Alexandria, where this fellow, I forget his name, kept brandishing the holy book and says, if all the knowledge is contained in this holy book, all the books of the Library of Alexandria are superfluous. If any of the knowledge you have in your library is contrary to the holy book, well, it is sacrilegious. So in any case, I need to burn it. So they have this narrative and the hypersensitive about the narrative. And I have carefully watched the construction of the narrative, how it moves from one lie to the other. One lie to the other. I had an ugly episode a couple of days ago when I downloaded in good faith a photo from the internet, which is still there. But since the hounds keep a watch on me, within 15 minutes, they sent out many of their canines with the original picture and the downloaded picture. Now, no Twitter handle wala, Twitter participant ever has such information. It is only intelligence agencies, it is only organized groups, it is only organized forces that have. The fact that 20, 30 of these started coming out meant that the organized forces were against. In a matter of minutes, they had started the narrative that I was a producer of fake news. For God's sake, we surf the web every day and these news or photos are up there. They don't come with an authentic, non-authentic symbol. So, of course, I had the decency. I had a better upbringing than most of them. So I deleted that photo, which there was nothing offensive with the photo. The photo was of a great leader doing a namaskar to a great lady. That's all. That's all. They made it look like some act of terror. See, this is how the narrative functions. To make a photo, even if it's fake, of a great man doing namaskar to a great lady as an act of terror. This is where the narrative transcends truth, transcends common sense, and drums in what it wants you to drum, what it wants you to believe. So this is another force that they feel that these writings to the contrary, these publications to the contrary, are disturbing the narrative. So that's a second way of looking at it. And the third way, I've told you the first outlook is these manufacturers of bad news, are a lot of vested interest who belong to Tukde gang, though I put the appellation Tukde gang to those through the regime itself, because no regime in India has ever earned it so well. Any case, so they think that the Tukde gang or the Lutyens gang or the Khan Market gang is up to mischief, and therefore it's a patriotic duty to squash them out down like beetles. Okay, take it or leave it. The second one is it is contrary to the narrative. Remember the Library of Alexandria? It is contrary to the narrative. It does not deserve to exist. So that's the second way of doing it. The third way is that the leader is infallible. It's infallible. This man has combined this mass appeal with a genetic streak in India that does not exist in Trump's America. It does not exist in Recep's Turkey, but it exists in India. This is a genetic trait called Guruvad. At a very early stage, society conditions us to take our worries, to seek a guru, and to lay all our worries at his feet, and whatever he says is God on earth. You know it, I know it. And this is a special trait of this subcontinent. Okay? And even Islam couldn't escape it. It brought in a heavy dose of Pirism coming in, which more or less something similar. But let's stick to the core of India. And the core of India believes in Guruvadi. Okay? Whether I accept Guruvadi or my logic and my rationality militates against Guruvadi is a different thing altogether. But Guruvadi exists. I can't talk to a brother because he believes in a guru who wears Gucci shoes and has the best of Armani. I can't talk to him like that. He just says this is beyond any conversation. So the third aspect that I would like to highlight is that the infallible leader has acquired traits of Guruvad. And therefore, anything said against him is not only anti-national, it is sacrilege. It is blasphemy. As you know, blasphemy does not exist in the Hindu scriptures in that sense. Paap, Pun, they exist, but blasphemy is a very Abrahamic religious concept. It's a concept that is confined to the Abrahamic religions. Blasphemy has been imported surreptitiously and is grafted with Guruvad to create a third aura of terror. Okay?
That's a lot of this exposition puts a lot of context to the entire affair. So now we know that it's not coming all of a sudden. It's the thought process. It was being built up. Tukde gang actually goes back a few years, and things have gone. The economy, the handling of the pandemic, etc. Things have gone so awry that there is instead of a course correction, instead of self-examination, and the most important thing that human beings should have individually and collectively, self-doubt are missing because there's a certitude. So I see what you're getting at, but that would imply that there is only further paranoia in the offing. Things are not going to change tomorrow morning, and the economy is not getting better for a while. So there is a certain paranoia which is likely to continue. So where are we heading?
See, I gave you three characteristics of why dissent is poison. Okay, I've explained just now. There are three reasons. They are maybe interconnected to each other, but there are three distinct reasons why dissent is to be crushed. Dissent is to be nipped in the bud. This amendment to Rule 8 of the pension rules is an extension of that, is a personification of that psyche. We have already spoken about rule of terror, reign of terror. The word as reign of terror, as you know, came in from a particular stage in the French Revolution, where Robespierre and others came up and instilled it. If I can't get your love, I shall get you by terror. I shall overawe you. That's another quality that infallible leaders who feel they are driven by destiny's children, they have it, but we'll not get into psychology. What is required as a complement to this is what I call the clapper boy gang. I mean, boy here is generic. You require clapper boys all around you. When you cry, you need Rudalis to cry for you. When you laugh, you need that class of people who will laugh with you. We used to call them Mushaib in Bengal. Every time the king cracked a poor joke, there were 20 others who thumped their thighs and go rollicking with laughter. So you have to have these orchestrated classes. And beyond the negative part of deleting or constricting or prohibiting or scaring negative news, as they feel, is also the drumbeating of a positive news. Since the positive news is not appearing by the laws of nature, people obligated to the system, people who are overawed by the Guru, are bundled together to express their solidarity with him, which in some cases is an expression of disgust at the negativity of those who put forward the alternate narrative. Every time the CCG has come up, CCG, our Constitutional Conduct Group of about 200 IAS, IPS, in the Foreign Service, Central Service officers, have come up with something of a statement, a petition as we call it, a call to reality. It has been contested by a ragtag gang, picked up for the moment, sometimes accountants whose names we have not heard of, chartered accountants or whatever accountants, sometimes economists of repute, of disrepute, and economists. They bundle together to write a petition which sounds similar in numbers. If 75 of us have given a petition, 110 of theirs gives a petition. They're not measuring the class of people who've written. Now, this sort of clapper boy group are being encouraged. One of the saddest things was that some of our foreign service colleagues have banded together. I went through the names. There is nothing to write home about. One or two or maybe four of them were known while they were there. Nothing like, what I mean, Sham Saran and Shiv Shankar and Narupama and this thing. But some of them were known, and one of them is an old man who has moved around regimes and is feeling a bit lost. But most of them, I would think, have been brought in to express their loyalty factor, and it would do well to public service, to the public domain, if they could come up with a statement somewhere on their website saying that I have not benefited from this regime. Most of them are beneficiaries of the regime, and most of them have been bundled together by India's most undiplomatic diplomat, external affairs minister. His undiplomacy, his lack of tact is shocking us. I mean, it's difficult to believe that he was ever in foreign service. He's bundled them together, and obviously it is a question of favors given, good pats on the back given, or will be given. Whereas on the other side, every member of the CCG can come up with a statement that we have not received, we have deprived ourselves, and wherever we are, many of the prominent ones are being hunted out and selected. So that's the difference, the rewards and punishments.
Yeah, but again, going back to just one thing, if you can explain briefly or predict briefly, where is this going to eventually end? Because there is no end to this paranoia, and the rule of terror is only going to get worse, or am I just, over imagining what it could be?
I'll put it this way. The rule of terror is on an upward trajectory. Knives are out. Voices have to be choked. Clapper boys have to be got together with rewards, especially as I've underlined, to sing hymns in favor of a foreign policy that is a disaster in the world now. The foreign minister went, he is incidentally known to be very close to the previous American establishment. He couldn't meet up with, as a courtesy call, 1 minute, 5 minutes with the president or the vice president. I mean, he was, and even the Secretary of State also met him rather reluctantly for a few minutes. So that shows our standing in America, towards which he and his boss deliberately aligned at the cost during the China episode. I'm not getting bigger into that. So what I'm saying is these clapper boys will also be required. They would also be required to come out with a megaphone that all is well, all is well. So we'll require. This one will go on for some time. A nation throws up, a nation gets what it deserves. And then I still believe that when we see that nothing beyond blackness exists, comes the hope in the form of Vox Populi. In 1977, when I conducted my first election, I was driving around as assistant returning officer and assistant magistrate, and I went to booth. There was no one there excepting the Congress candidate. There were no booths outside the polling stations, none whatsoever. It was only Congress, Congress, Congress all the way. I felt so dejected. After all, I had left student activism only several months ago, that nothing can come to India. Nothing will ever happen to this country. And the lady and her regime have ensured through a very powerful narrative that she was here to stay. And the rest of it was a validation for our continuation. When the ballot papers were opened after the March elections, people screamed in the hall. And as assistant returning officer, I tapped the gavel because I was sitting on the high chair and saying, okay, no enthusiasm. We are government servants. We are supposed to keep it all within us. Now, please go and complete the counting. Please complete the counting. Kaun baat sun rahe? People were doing CTs, people were doing jig dances, because everybody had thought within himself that something should be done. And it appeared that nothing would be possible. And then the people spoke. I'll give you a smaller example, but an equally soul-stirring example. West Bengal, elections. I don't call it the Mamata Banerjee elections because though Mamata has come out on top, Mamata has been a beneficiary of a large chunk of 15 to 20% votes that have been culled out from the left parties and the traditional Congress votes and bestowed upon her party by people who don't even like that party. The interesting thing is not how they viewed it. The interesting thing is the decimation of the CPIM that ruled Bengal for 34 years, decimated, not one seat. The decimation of the Congress that had always been a powerful force, not one seat. And all seats, 48% of the popular vote were banded together under the Mamata Trinamool barrier by people who may not believe in her. That sort of endorsement is a signature. All of you were frightened that Bengal is going on because that the national narrative was being told in Delhi to all who would listen, and the Godi press was only lapping for what Amit Shah had to say. That हम तो इतने में जीत गया, first round में तो इसमें 32 सीट में तो हमें 33 मिल ही गया. I don't know who was feeding him. The result that came out. So I'm coming back to two examples of Vox Populi. We have to build up on that, and Vox Populi, Vox Dei, the voice of the people is the voice of God. As a believer, as a non-atheist, I would say that there is hope. Just do your duty. Just stick to your values. Don't sell them off for temporary gains. Just bear the frightening thought of somebody knocking at your door. It's happened in Calcutta. People have come at 5 o'clock with central forces and taken them away, but they were a different class. Once they've done it with big ministers, they can do it with anyone. Never mind. Let us get over the fears. The amendment to the rule is a reminder of what the regime means, what it's all up to. And as if that was not enough, another circular came out from the Vigilance Commission saying henceforth anyone who is taken or appointed as an advisor in any government post would have to go through a vigilance clearance. अब वो आदमी 10 साल पहले he has left the government. What will vigilance do about what clearance? If the vigilance had anything to do other than promoting Modi acolytes, which they have done deliberately, if they had anything to do, they would have said then, nah. They use terms like notorious. Notorious the to, why didn't you take action then? But anyway, the new circular is that anybody who's appointed as observer, as advisor to the government in any post, needs a vigilance clearance. Now, I can tell you as a retired secretary, and as somebody who spent 4 decades, the Vigilance Commission's database will not have much. So such applications would go perhaps to Jhandewala or some other external place where they would be cleared for the loyalty factor, L factor, and then sent to Vigilance Commission, and the Vigilance Commission would thereafter say nothing against him may be employed. Something like that. So this racket that we first started with the 31st May order, then I think this is the 3rd June order, this will come out more and more. But it needs to be tested out in the courts. It needs to be tested in the courts, and Mr. Dulat or somebody can't run to the court just now because really there is no cause of action. The courts believe in a cause of action. So first time the cause of action comes, and both justice and righteousness have to be defended. Somebody will have to go to the court. And the courts may take a favorable view and restore status quo ante.
So summing all that up and saying that Vox Populi will prevail whenever it does, and the fact that this needs to be challenged as and when something happens. Do you foresee these challenges firstly? And speaking on behalf of the constitutional group, which of course you can't, you're one of 200 members, but still as a recommendation or as will the constitutional group also consider some kind of legal action?
You see, the Constitutional Conduct Group is a liberal grouping of people who have diverse ideas on every subject. God bless their difference of opinion. And they've come out with some sort of an agreed area. They have taken up many causes. Many of the members have informed the group that I am going on a PIL in my personal capacity, in my institutional capacity. Harsh Mandar, for instance, is a member, and he has other identities also. So Harsh has to fight his own cases. So there'll be people within the group, connected with the group, who would take a more active role in upholding democracy. But as I said, the mere issuance of an order means nothing unless someone is affected and there is a cause of action to agitate before a court. It's a long process, but the very consciousness of this process, the very consciousness of the requirement, and the very will to take it to the court is the hope that democracy thrives on.
So that's a finale with a kind of a stirring call, in fact, I would say. And in a strange way, Jawahar, it reflects your younger idealism of being a fighter against this regime or the regime then. So you were a student activist, and then you joined the so-called bureaucratic.
I was co-opted in. As they say, the system co-opts.
Okay.
And I'm not the only one. There have been dozens and dozens of people who had these very strong ideas about what is right and what is wrong, who were co-opted into the system and have retained their values throughout the 40 years.
Precisely. That's what I was trying to get at. That it shows that you are not going to personally accept this lying down, and you are. I look forward to more of your writings, and I don't know whether you were ever attached to any kind of security establishment. Were you?
Mercifully, no. Mercifully, no. But I worked with many of them, and my association or the contagion or whatever may be used, but mercifully, no. I'm not intelligent enough to be working there.
Okay.
I was, in fact, to end up, never trusted with such serious matters. You know, the matters that were left to me were education, where I spent many years, culture, media, and such other stuff that is superfluous to the core of every regime, which rests on home, foreign affairs, defense.
Okay. So on that, I would say somewhat humorous note, we shall end this conversation. Jawahar, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Many of the things that remain hazy in press reports, you have clarified them. You have explained them, that it's 26 organizations, and out of which not very many right. But still, I think there is a sinister element to this whole thing. And we will watch what this regime does, and in its paranoia to protect its sacred narrative, and how the people react. I think, if I may say personally, I think there is some kind of, if not disgust, certainly hopelessness, and in the future, after what has happened in the last 3 to 5 years. So let us see how things unfold for our country. Thank you very much, Jawahar Sarkar. That was Jawahar Sarkar, civil servant, and I would say intellectual activist, if he doesn't mind my saying so, and writer, researcher, talking about the new amendment to the service conduct rules of retired bureaucrats and bureaucrats. We'll be back again next week with another episode and another guest of the Wire Talks. Thank you very much. You can check out this podcast and other interesting ones on the Wire website, the IVM podcast website, app, or wherever else that you get your podcasts. Goodbye from me, Siddharth Bhatia, and the Wire Talks podcast team.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'd like to thank the sponsor of the network this week, Credencia. Thank you so much for making this possible. On Cyrus Says, Cyrus was joined by actress Shreya Pilgaonkar to talk about her career in acting. On Begin the Journey, Ashish Vidyarthi lists down the modern concepts of friendship and how one can choose the right friend circle in life on Begin the Journey. On The Habit Coach, Ashton Doctor was joined by Aisha Bilamoria to talk about running and developing an athletic mentality. Farhad and Sunitra are joined by LGBTQ workplace advocate Suresh Ramdas to discuss the new normal in queer relationships on KBCD. On Tere Mere Raaste, Keshav Chaturvedi takes us to the riverbanks of Banaras and describes the soulful mornings to us. And finally, on the Positively Unlimited podcast, Chetna Chakravarti takes the fear out of the word responsibility. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
2020 is a difficult year. A global pandemic, protests, elections, recessions, you get the picture. What we need is a space where we can have nuanced discussions about global affairs and foreign policy. That's where I come in. My name is Hamsini Hariharan and I host the States of Anarchy podcast. Every second Tuesday, I speak to experts in the field of international relations to make a little more sense of the world. So join me on the IVM podcast app, website, or wherever you're listening to me right now.